There is a war going on right now that most people cannot see. It does not happen in the streets or on the news in any obvious way. It happens inside the devices you carry in your pocket, on your desk, and in your home. On one side are AI surveillance systems that are getting smarter, faster, and more capable every year. On the other side is something new that did not really exist until very recently, which is consumer hardware that is specifically designed to stop those surveillance systems from working. In 2026, that hardware has reached a point where it is not just slowing down AI surveillance, but in many real situations, making it genuinely impossible. This article tells that story from beginning to end and explains exactly how the hardware in people's hands right now is winning that fight. To understand why the hardware matters so much, you first need to understand how AI surveillance actually gets its information. It does not work by magic. It works by collecting data, and the collection has to start somewhere. Usually it starts with your own devices. Your phone, your laptop, your smart speaker, your camera, your television. These devices are constantly running software, constantly connected to networks, and in many cases constantly recording their environment. The data they collect gets sent to servers where AI systems process it, combine it with data from millions of other people, and build detailed pictures of who you are, what you do, and how you live. The key word in all of that is sent. The data has to travel from your device to somewhere else for the surveillance to work at scale. For years, there was almost nothing the average person could do about this because the hardware itself was designed to move data outward freely, and the only tools available to fight back were software tools, which can always be bypassed by other software. What has changed in 2026 is that the hardware itself has been redesigned at a fundamental level to stop that outward flow of data before it ever begins. The most direct and simple example of this is the physical disconnect. Several major laptop and phone manufacturers in 2026 have built genuine hardware-level power cuts into their devices for cameras and microphones. This is not a software mute. It is not a setting in a menu. It is a physical switch that removes electrical power from the component entirely. When a camera has no power, it cannot capture anything. When a microphone has no power, it cannot hear anything. No software on Earth can activate a component that is receiving zero electricity. This sounds almost too simple, but that simplicity is exactly what makes it so effective. Every software-based privacy solution that came before this could theoretically be bypassed by something more sophisticated. A hardware power cut cannot be bypassed because there is nothing to bypass. The laws of physics are doing the work, and those laws do not have exploitable weaknesses. For people who have spent years wondering whether their camera or microphone might be secretly active, this hardware gives them an answer that requires no trust in any company, any app, or any promise. You cut the power and the surveillance becomes physically impossible. The second major development is what is happening with on-device AI processing. For most of the past decade, using AI features on consumer devices meant your data leaving your device. You spoke to a voice assistant and your voice traveled to a data center. You used an AI photo tool and your images went to a cloud server. You used smart features in any app, and the information powering those features came from your data being processed somewhere outside your control. This was not a bug in those systems. It was how they were designed. The AI processing happened on powerful remote servers because consumer devices were not powerful enough to do it locally. That has changed in 2026. The AI chips being built into consumer devices this year are powerful enough to run genuine and useful AI models entirely on the device itself. Your voice assistant processes what you say locally. Your photos are enhanced locally. Your writing tools work locally. The features work just as well, but your data never goes anywhere. It stays on your device in AI surveillance systems that depend on intercepting data. In transit, have nothing to intercept because nothing is being transmitted. This shift from cloud AI to on-device AI is one of the most significant privacy developments in consumer technology history. And it happened not because companies suddenly became more ethical, but because the hardware became powerful enough to make it possible. Memory encryption is another piece of this story that most people have never heard of, but that closes a serious and long-standing vulnerability. Your device's working memory, the RAM that holds everything your computer is actively doing, has historically been readable by anyone with the right tools and access. If an attacker could get to your device's memory, they could see your open messages, your passwords, your browsing activity, and everything else your device was working on at that moment. Government-level surveillance programs have used this vulnerability for years. Forensic tools used by law enforcement can extract enormous amounts of information from device memory. In 2026, new processors are shipping with full memory encryption turned on by default. Every single piece of data in RAM is encrypted using keys that are created fresh at startup and stored only inside the processor chip itself. If anyone tries to read your memory without those keys, they get meaningless, scrambled data. The keys exist nowhere except inside the chip, and they disappear completely when the device is turned off. There is no way to reconstruct them after the fact. This does not just make memory attacks harder, it makes them practically useless against properly protected devices. And it does so through hardware rather than software, which means it cannot be disabled or circumvented through the operating system. Network surveillance is a form of tracking that works even when your actual data is encrypted, and most people do not know it exists. Here is how it works. Even if nobody can read the content of what you're sending over the internet, they can still watch the pattern of your network traffic. When you connect to the internet, how often you send data, how much data you send each time, which servers you communicate with, and when. These patterns create a unique signature that AI systems can use to identify you across different networks and track your behavior over time without ever seeing a single word you wrote or a single image you shared. This kind of analysis is called traffic fingerprinting, and it has been used by surveillance systems at various levels for years. New networking hardware in 2026 devices fights back against this by randomizing traffic patterns at the hardware level. And the chips deliberately vary the timing and size of data packets going out from your device, making the behavioral signature much harder to read. They also handle encrypted routing faster and more reliably than software solutions ever could. Traffic fingerprinting is not impossible against these devices, but it becomes significantly harder. And the AI systems that rely on clean pattern data to identify individuals start making more errors as the patterns become noisier. There is also important progress happening in how devices protect themselves against hidden surveillance software. One of the most effective surveillance techniques involves installing software at a very deep level inside a device, below the operating system in the firmware layer, where normal security tools cannot easily detect it. This kind of attack has been used by sophisticated actors for a long time, and once the software is installed, it is extremely difficult for the device owner to even know it is there, let alone remove it. New hardware in 2026 includes dedicated chips that continuously check the integrity of the device's software from the moment it starts up to the moment it shuts down. If anything unexpected appears in the firmware or operating system, the chip detects it and alerts the user. This continuous hardware level checking is something that software-based security tools simply cannot replicate because they run on top of the operating system and cannot see below it. The hardware checker runs independently and can see everything. This makes the deep, hidden software attacks that surveillance systems have relied on significantly harder to carry out and much easier to catch when they are attempted. It is important to be honest about what all of this hardware cannot do. These developments are real and meaningful, but they are not a complete solution to every privacy problem. If you voluntarily use apps and services that collect your data as part of how they operate, better hardware does not stop that collection. If you share information with platforms that track your behavior, the hardware in your device cannot undo that sharing. Physical disconnect switches protect your camera and microphone from remote access, but they do not protect you from surveillance that happens through the services you choose to use. Memory encryption stops certain attacks, but there are many other ways data can be exposed. Hardware traffic randomization makes behavioral fingerprinting harder, but not impossible, for the most determined and sophisticated actors. The hardware of 2026 is the strongest set of privacy tools ever built into consumer devices, but it works best as part of a broader approach that also includes being thoughtful about which apps you trust and what information you share voluntarily. The bigger picture here is genuinely encouraging, though. The fact that hardware companies are competing to build better privacy features into their products in 2026 tells you something important about where the market is heading. Not long ago, privacy was something that only a small number of technically minded people cared about deeply enough to pay for or seek out. Most people accepted the trade-off of convenience for data collection without thinking much about it. That has changed. Years of visible and widely reported stories about data misuse, surveillance programs, AI-powered tracking, and personal information being used in ways people never agreed to have made ordinary people genuinely aware of what is at stake. People ask different questions when they buy devices now. They want to know what their camera does when they are not using it. They want to know whether their voice assistant is always listening. They want to know where their data goes and who can see it. Hardware makers are responding to those questions with real engineering solutions, and that competition is producing faster and better results than any regulation or policy change has managed to deliver. The full picture from start to finish is this. AI surveillance works by collecting data from your devices and sending it to systems that can process and use it. For years, consumer hardware made this collection easy and gave people almost no real tools to stop it. The hardware arriving in 2026 changes that relationship in a fundamental way. Physical power disconnects make camera and microphone surveillance impossible when activated. On-device AI processing means your data never needs to leave your hands to use powerful AI features. Full memory encryption means that even direct hardware attacks on your device's memory produce nothing useful. Hardware-level network traffic randomization makes behavioral fingerprinting much harder. Continuous hardware integrity checking makes hidden surveillance software far more difficult to install and impossible to hide indefinitely. Each of these features addresses a different part of the surveillance chain, and together they create a level of hardware privacy protection that has never existed in consumer technology before. The fight against AI surveillance is far from over, and the systems on the other side are not getting weaker. But for the first time, the hardware that ordinary people can buy and carry with them is genuinely built to push back. That is a real change, and it matters more than most people currently realize.